October 31st, 2018. Shibuya, the Jujutsu sorcerer formerly known as Suguru Geto, enacted his plan 1,000 years in the making. The optimization of cursed energy. Using his newly acquired idol transfiguration, Kenjaku used a remote activation of the technique on those who he had previously marked, creating 2 new groups of sorcerers. The first being your average citizens who could possess a cursed technique were unable to manipulate cursed energy. He altered their brain, allowing them to use it. And the second being the newly reborn sorcerers who hundreds of years ago made a binding vow with Kenny. The seals on those cursed objects they were sealed in were now broken, allowing them to incarnate, all for the purpose of evolution. That was just one small step in the optimization of cursed energy. After all, bring back some old sorcerers and making some new ones won't produce the results Kenny was after. They were merely another pawn on his very large and convoluted chessboard. So to get a better view, let's look at the next step of his master plan. The Culling Game. Kenjaku's plan and the purpose of the colonies weren't made clear till the remaining sorcerers met with Tengen, who explained that Kenjaku was preparing a merger between herself and humanity. And yes, she is a she. Since the failure to merge with the previous star plasma vessel, Tengen has evolved into a similar state to that of a cursed spirit, so she won't be able to resist Kenny's cursed manipulation. But to be able to perform such an incredible feat, Kenny would need an insane amount of cursed energy, and a way to mark everyone in Japan. And that, of course, is where the colonies come into this. While the newly awakened sorcerers fight within the barrier of the colonies, the curse energy is collected, fueling a larger barrier to the west of Japan, allowing it to sweep over the rest of the nation, and preparing all those who it passes over for the other side. Continuing till all of Japan has been covered. It is important to mention here, since it's never really explained what the other side is. In the original translation, the other side refers to Higen, which aside from being a Buddhist holiday, comes from a Chinese term to pass over to the other shore, which means to attain nirvana. When the merger of humanity and Tengen's evolved soul begins, the boundaries between individual people will break apart, and the negativity of just one person will become that of millions. As this happens, Tengen will no longer be able to maintain her physical form and will lose her sense of self. While the impurities of humanity become part of the world, hundreds or thousands of curses will begin appearing all across the world due to the collective negativity of millions of souls. It's impossible to know the outcome for sure, but Kenny personally thinks it'll give birth to one cursed spirit with the curse energy of millions of people, speculating that it may have a similar ability to Uzumaki. But why do all this? What's Kenny's motive? Well, for that, we need to move on to the next arc, the capture of Tengen. Well, he gives us 2 reasons. The first is to create another golden age of Jujutsu, and the second, well, to quote him directly, "I'm fascinated. I feel like a child holding a crayon in front of a blank piece of paper." Or in other words, pranking my bestie by turning them into a cursed spirit. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I mean, hey, why not do the same for me? In Star and Oil, not much more is mentioned about Kenny's plan, but there is an interesting note to add. In chapter 206, Kenny mentioned that there was a secret about the culling game that Tengen never mentioned to the remaining sorcerers. We didn't get to hear the end of this statement, as Kenny is interrupted by another ass beating, but my guess would be he was going to mention the purification barriers we hear about in chapter 220. If Tengen had simply destroyed them, then the culling game would have come to an end, but would have most likely resulted in more innocent casualties. At the end of the arc, Kenny also refers to Tengen as my friend. The two definitely share a closer history than we think, but what happened between the two of them, aside from the 2 attempted murders, is still unknown. But it can be inferred from Kenny's comments towards Tengen in chapter 222. Kenny disagreed with Tengen's idle disposition, only ever sitting there in the tomb, maintaining the barrier, and never attempting to improve the world at all, to stop the spread of cursed spirits. Not everyone has the courage to put their own life on the line, but if their hand is forced by someone else, they have no choice but to take action. It always begins with a single step. Only then can you make steady progress towards your own ideals. I held nothing but contempt for those unwilling to take the first step. After all, when there's no hope left, death is always an option. I'm talking to you, Tengen. And just as a side note, I don't believe the secret rule Kenny mentioned to Urme at the end of Star and Oil is what he was going to say to Yuki. It doesn't make sense that that was what Tengen was hiding from them. But all W streaks come to an end at some point. The death of Kenny. Bitch fucking dies? Before dying, Kenny transferred the permission to begin the merger, along with the fetus Tengen to Sukuna, which does leave a few questions. First, what Kenny said before he died. I've already had Sukuna undergo the succession ritual. What remains is simply his becoming of the parent of the ritual via the culling games. Now, I know I might not be the sharpest knife in the crayon box, but what the fuck does that mean? We've had zero mention of the succession ritual before or since. It was most likely something Sukuna had to undergo as part of the binding vow that was hinted about in chapter 221. And if so, is it just something that allows him to host Tengen? Is it something else? It feels like if this was important, we would have heard it at least one other time in the series, but we haven't heard it since Kenny died. So maybe it's nothing. But now is when things get interesting. With Sukuna in possession of the ability to begin the merger, it's hard to know what might happen next. I mean, addressing the elephant in the room, even if Sukuna were to win, the merger doesn't seem like something he would do. So a lot of people have assumed that the previously mentioned binding vow would force Sukuna to complete the merger if Kenny died, which is possible. It's the more likely binding vow he would have made. But I think things might have changed after chapter 258. We finally got to see Sukuna open his domain again after being fried by Gojo, but it's looking rather strange. Now with a large spine going at the back of it, as well as several eyes, and a pair of hands to hold Sukuna. It's possible this is the true form of his domain, but what I think is more likely is that Sukuna managed to pull parts from Megumin's domain to rebuild his own, and what appears to be possibly parts of Kenny's, or maybe even Tengen's, with the main part of the domain now itself resembling a cursed spirit. However, this is a bit of a reach, and the connections are a bit superficial, as we have next to no evidence to suggest that Kenny transferred any of himself with the Tengen fetus. I thought I might as well mention it, as it is a popular theory going around right now. At least the Megumin part of it is. But to get to my point, it seems Yuji has finally pushed Sukuna to his limit, which explains why he's making such risky moves like using an incomplete domain, and finally using Furnace or Divine Flame or whatever you want to call it. It's clear now that Sukuna is using everything at his disposal, and if that doesn't work, if he fails to kill Yuji, what else does he have? Preforming the merger and absorbing it into himself. Sukuna still holds Tengen inside him and has the authority to begin the merger. And with the Sukuna cooking parallels becoming more obvious, it wouldn't be too far-fetched to see him gain power by eating someone. And I mean, things would come full circle, like Yuji ate part Sukuna, and Sukuna ate someone, you know what I'm saying? But that is just my own personal theory. If he did make a binding vow with Kenny, then it's unlikely he would be able to do so due to him mentioning that the culling game needs to end for his plan for the merger, and not even Sukuna would risk breaking a binding vow. It's a common trope in some of the biggest manga and anime of the last decade, where like a world-ending plan will succeed, only for the good guys to overpower or reverse the damage of said plan. Think of like Aizen merging with the Hokyoku in Bleach, the Infinite Tsukiyomi in Naruto. It's not like it's a bad trope, I'm a fan of those moments, but really, who knows what Akutami will do. What do you guys think? I mean, you can tell me in the comments, you know. I'll see you sometime. I don't really know when. I wasn't expecting this to take over 5 months to do, so hopefully the next video will be out a bit sooner. Anyways, see you guys then. Peace.